Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode here from GuigLit, your YouTube channel for all things books, beards and beyond. Today we're continuing our series on Macbeth and we are combining two scenes, Act 3, Scenes 1 and 2 on the play. But before we get into that, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, share it with all your friends and hit the bell icon for more videos on the channel. If you haven't already, it would be great if you're able to subscribe and follow and share the word of GuigLit across all our different platforms as well, TikTok, Instagram and Twitter. So, as always, what can we do with the lesson itself? You can take notes. I'd strongly encourage everybody to take notes on what they watch here today and take your copy of the text along to this very video. Make sure you use this as a revision tool going forwards into the next few months, either by yourself or with classmates. Works really successfully. As well as this, use mind maps. Use this to help build on mind maps of characters, themes and various acts in the play, and use it to list examples as well. A lot of really rich detail we go into today, and that will really help your own understanding of this famous Shakespearean play. So, a couple of things you need to know about Act 3, Scenes 1 and 2. Some key information, I would say, to give you an understanding of these scenes themselves. Now, first of all, Act 3 begins with Macbeth at his zenith. It's the absolute peak of his power. Remember, he's not just the King of Scotland, but he's also King of the heavens themselves, as being God's representative on earth. That makes him king of both this mortal realm, but also eternity itself. So he's the most powerful he will be in the entire play. Now, Banquo is suspicious of his rise to power at this point. Banquo, remember, is the only other character that's seen the witches and knows of the prophecies that the witches have told Macbeth, so he suspects how Macbeth has made this rise to power in such a quick time. Now, Act 3, Scene 2, I've always said to my classes and the students I teach, is the decisive splitting point between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, where they start to go their separate ways and it's almost at the point of no return for them, because Lady Macbeth is kept away from the plans of assassination. Banquo's assassination is not known to Lady Macbeth, and I think this really creates the schism between the two characters here that then gets wider and wider and wider into this gulf that leads to the end of the play. So without further ado, let's crack on with the scenes themselves. We start at Force and the palace itself, and Banquo in Act 3, Scene 1 starts. He comments on how thou hast it now. Notice how he uses the word thou. The pronoun thou is a very informal way of referring to Macbeth here. There's almost a kind of lack of respect for the title, or maybe a slight bit of suspicion comes with this. He continues by going King, Cawdor, Glamis, all as the weird women promised. Notice this list of three. The three as a number is so significant in the play itself. You have the three witches, you then have the fact that Macbeth is Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor and King. He gets three accolades. He has three accolades in the play, and we see this idea of the three coming through again, this list of three, and how it corrupts or subverts the Holy Trinity as a nod to the Holy Trinity of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit. Really important point to notice there. It also reinforces all the power Macbeth now has. He has everything in his grasp, couldn't wish for more. As this continues, he says how the weird women promised. We know them as the witches. The word weird here, the adjective, takes on a different meaning to what it did previously. The word weird here means this ability to see into the future, this idea of something much more almost like a prophecy prediction maker in that regard. That's what the word weird stands for there. Banquo continues and says, I fear thou played most foully for it. Notice the words here, fear and most foully, how he's deeply suspicious of Macbeth and how Macbeth came to be this all-powerful king. Continuing on in this point, he then says later on how Macbeth, their speeches, the witches' speeches, shine. Why by the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well and set me up in hope? Now there's a point here where we can arguably criticise Banquo. Banquo knows that, or has great reason to believe that Macbeth has gained this, has ill-gotten gains here on his hands. And he knows this and has reason to believe this, but he won't tell anyone. Banquo not telling anyone, this idea of hush no more, keeping it secret, shows how one could argue he's not telling anyone because he knows he has to gain from the prophecies as well. So there is an argument here that Banquo isn't entirely moral in and of himself. Then a senate sounds and Macbeth enters as king and Lady Macbeth as queen. This is the first appearance of them both as the monarchs. There's a deliberate sense of grandeur and spectacle in this scene. It's important to remember. Now as the scene continues, we see how Macbeth and Lady Macbeth call Banquo their chief guest. If he had been forgotten, it had been as a gap in our great feast, and all thing unbecoming. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth here are deliberately showing this kind of false face. They're using that sense of flattery that they'd done previously to or suck up, for want of a better term, to Banquo here, even when we find out later on that Macbeth is very much planning his own murder, the murder of Banquo. Now, as we continue, Banquo says, "To the which my duties are with a most indissoluble tie forever knit," as they talk. Banquo replies in the same tone. He is hiding his fears. They're both parties here, the Macbeths and Banquo, are hiding away from their own emotions at this point, and hiding away from the way they truly feel, or their true emotions. Banquo then talks about how he will be riding this evening, as far my lord as will fix up the time twixt this and supper. Banquo is hiding away for the time. He doesn't trust to be near Macbeth or the Macbeths. Notice how he then refers to him as my lord, recognising Macbeth's new title and stature in the play. Macbeth asks him to fail not our feast, and Banquo says, "My lord, I will not." Now Macbeth then turns his attentions to Duncan's two sons. He says how we here, our bloody cousins, are bestowed in England and in Ireland. Here we now see that Malcolm and Donalbain, I should say, my apologies, Malcolm and Donalbain, have been made the prime suspects of the murder. They have been framed for this, and the attention is drawn upon them, leaving Macbeth even more free. Macbeth then asks if Fleance goes with him. Notice here he's interested to know if Banquo's own child will go. We see how devious Macbeth is, particularly in the later portions of this scene, as the murderers enter. Banquo confirms that he is, and wishes them a safe journey. He says, "I wish your horses swift and sure of foot, and commend you to their backs." He's continuing with this false sense of flattery. Then Macbeth allows everybody to keep themselves till supper time alone, so he's including Lady Macbeth here. He wants to be left alone, and Lady Macbeth is not part of this next point, which is important, that everyone leaves but Macbeth. Macbeth is left alone to await the murderers. Really important point. Now, the attendant brings the two gentlemen over to Macbeth, but before he does, we have this really soliloquy that's rich in detail on how Macbeth currently feels at this point. "To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus," is how he begins. "Our fears in Banquo stick deep." Notice here that Macbeth's reign has only just begun, but it's already rooted in fear and paranoia. This is a very common exam extract, so do not be surprised if you have to be tested on Macbeth and this should come up. Notice how he begins with a sense of fear and paranoia. "Our fears in Banquo stick deep." He then continues and comments on points of Banquo's virtues. "His royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared. He hath a wisdom that doth guide his valour to act in safety. None but he, whose being I do fear." Notice this here, that like Duncan before him, Macbeth is able to see the positive qualities of Banquo. Arguably this makes Macbeth a worse villain because he's not blinded to what he's doing. He's doing this in a very much cold, clear and level-headed manner. So there's a sense that it actually makes him a worse villain for doing so. Now he continues this soliloquy by saying how under him, under Banquo, my genius is rebuked, as it is said Mark Antony's was by Caesar. We get this almost megalomaniacal, egotistical perception here by Macbeth, comparing himself to, the greatest Roman ruler of all time, saying how his own power is being mocked here. As he continues, he then begins to comment on how they, the witches, hailed him, Banquo, father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, with a barren sceptre in my gripe. Notice here on how he's wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. The biggest problem for Macbeth is that with his prophecy, he was not promised any children at the end of it, or any legacy. The crown itself is pointless to Macbeth without this lineage and legacy that Banquo has clearly been promised. That's his biggest fear with Banquo, that Banquo will have sons that will be king, whereas he will not. And in doing so, Macbeth realises how, for Banquo's issue have I filed my mind, for them the gracious Duncan have I murdered, that mine eternal jewel, his soul, has been given to the common enemy of man, obviously meaning Satan there, to make them kings, the seed of Banquo kings. It's here he realises how all he's done in murdering Duncan has cost him his soul for nothing. He realises that he's done wrong. In saying this, there's almost a confession to his deed here, but there is also an aspect in what Macbeth is saying here that reinforces not only has he lost his soul, but he's lost his soul for the purpose of Banquo's prosperity and not his. So in doing so, he comments how, come fate into the list and champion me to the utterance. So he's going to act to change this. He has to do something here that will make sure that this will go in his favour. So two murderers enter at this point. It's of common interest here to notice how Macbeth says, was it not yesterday we spoke together? Yesterday here kind of demonstrates this has already been planned out, and everything he said to Banquo before showed his false face previously. Now, continuing the scene itself, Macbeth then asks if they've considered of his speeches, and he tries to manipulate the murderers into having a vested interest, an emotional cause and reason to murder Banquo. Know that it was he in times past which held you so under fortune. This idea that the murderers have been wronged by Banquo and they should feel like they should really wish to murder Banquo, not just for the sake of a commission or a task being paid for here. He's trying to use emotion over duty here to make sure they absolutely will kill Banquo. He asks if they are so gospel to pray for this good man and for his issue. Macbeth wants to be able to trust the murderers to do his bidding on an ethical level. It's not about the money aspect for Macbeth or any sense of a bounty or reward. What it is for Macbeth is this sense that they want to kill Banquo, that they wish to kill Banquo more than anything else. Now, the first murderer says how they are men, and then Macbeth runs off this long list of how, well, in the catalogue they go for men in the same way that hounds, greyhounds, mongrels, spaniels, curs, and so on are clept all by the name of dogs. Macbeth is showing his intelligence here. He realises that while, there are all different types of men, there are liars, there are good men, there are bad men, there are evil men, and he sees that in these two, using the metaphor of dogs. He wants to know if they're the right quality of man, emotionally and morally. All the time here, we have to remember, Macbeth isn't planning this murder of Banquo on a rash whim or a decision that is really done fitfully. He's doing this deliberately and cold and in a calculating manner. As he continues, he says, I will put that business in your bosoms, whose execution takes your enemy off, grapples you to the heart and love of us. Macbeth needs to know, as I said earlier, that the murderers are emotionally ready to complete the act. He wants them to be invested in it as much as he is himself. They then comment on how they both are. How the second murderer is one whom the vile wind blows and buffets of the world, of so incensed I'm reckless what I do despite the world. The first murderer continues and says how so weary with disasters, tugged with fortune, I would not set my lie on any chance to mend it or be rid of it. Both murderers admit to having these right characteristics that Macbeth so desperately desires them to have, because he needs them to be emotionally invested in this, because he doesn't trust it to be continued or to be undertaken if it was just a specific duty. He fears that, Banquo could have a say as well. He doesn't wish Banquo to have that. He wants these men to be so riled up and so convinced of this duty that they will go along with it regardless. Now, continuing into this thing, it says how both of you knew Banquo as your enemy. He is mine, and in such bloody distance, every minute of his being thrusts against my nearest of life. Macbeth feels a genuine threat from Banquo, not on a physical level necessarily, but on a cerebral, mental level. This idea of his knowledge. He knows what Macbeth knows, particularly about the witches and the prophecies, and that is a danger to Macbeth, one that he has to contend with and challenge and have silenced by the murderers. I must not for certain friends that are both his and mine, whose loves I may not drop. He can't kill him personally. He has too many people that care about Banquo close to his heart, and he doesn't wish to rock the boat. Macbeth is clever enough to know he can't perform this task himself. He is Machiavellian in the way he does this, an adjective giving connotations of how one gains power not simply through strength and might, but through cunning. This Machiavellian sense to him coming through here. He realises that he can't kill Banquo. He needs someone that doesn't really have a close direct connection to Banquo to do so. And so, as the scene continues, the murderers say, "Though our lives," and he comments and cuts them off Macbeth by saying, "Your spirits shine through you." Notice this difference. He switches to spirits instead of lives. He's keen to not talk about the reality of the situation. In the following passages, Macbeth very much uses euphemistic language, for example, that how he requires a clearness and with him to leave no rubs nor botches in the work, and how Fleance, a child, must embrace the fate of that dark hour. Macbeth starts talking in euphemistic language to hide the dark reality of the situation, that he's ordering the murder not just of Banquo, but of Banquo's child, Banquo's son, a boy. And notice how he can't bring himself to say it in such brutal terms. This is a man who is used to brutality, as we've seen in Act 1, Scene 2. He's used to brutal acts, but he very cleverly disguises the brutality of these acts in these words and phrases. And at the end of this scene, the murderers then say how they're both resolved. And Macbeth's final lines are in this scene, "Thy soul's flight, if it find heaven, must find it out tonight." So just like he did with Duncan in Act 2, Scene 1, Macbeth tries to use a kind of moral justification in killing Banquo. He's saying that thy soul's flight, if it find heaven. Notice the word if there, that conditional tense, suggesting there to the audience how, Banquo may not be entirely moral. He may not necessarily rise and ascend to heaven. And Macbeth trying to give himself some justification for the awful deeds he has just set in motion at the end of Act 3, Scene 1. We now continue to Act 3, Scene 2, and we're in the palace at this point. It starts with Lady Macbeth asking if Banquo's gone from court. The servant says that he is, but will return again tonight. Lady Macbeth then says, "Say to the king I would attend his leisure for a few words." We see here this first hint of a distance growing between the two characters. They're not together, even though they're in the very same castle. The servant exits, and Lady Macbeth then continues by saying, "Naught's had, all's spent, where our desire is got without content. 'Tis safer to be that which we destroy than by destruction dwell in doubtful joy." Lady Macbeth's fears are openly expressed here for the very first time since the murder of Duncan and since becoming queen. Notice phrases like without consent, naught, destruction, and all. There's difference between naught and all. She fears this as well. She realises not everything has been perfectly committed and planned yet. They are not out of the woods. There is still a lot they need to do. Then Macbeth enters, and notice how Lady Macbeth's tone changes. Lady Macbeth then says, "How now, my lord, why do you keep alone of sorriest fancies? Things without all remedy should be without regard, what's done is done." Lady Macbeth shows here to the audience how Macbeth has had a growing sense of isolation in keeping alone more often. She then tries to remedy the situation, saying, "Should be without regard, what's done is done." Lady Macbeth is trying to hide her own fears. She could here at this point open up to Macbeth, and they could be honest with each other. But rather than doing that, Lady Macbeth instead decides to hide her own fears and tries to placate or calm Macbeth with his. Should be without regard, what's done is done. The sense of move on. There is nothing to be gained from fretting and fearing anymore. However, Macbeth very much is fretting and fearing when we see how he comments on, "We have scotched the snake, not killed it. We burnt the snake, not killed it." Notice he uses the pronoun we, which still kind of sees them as a pair involved in these acts to a degree, but how this idea of it's not complete yet. Their deeds have only just begun. There's still more to be done. The snake can refer to Banquo. The snake can refer to what the path they have to cover, the tracks they have to cover. Very much more in that regard. As he continues, he uses phrases like the affliction of these terrible dreams and how to better be with the dead, commenting how Duncan is in his grave and how nothing can touch him further. Macbeth is tortured and tormented by life at this point, and he realises here that his acts and his decisions have led to an awful situation, and this idea that the price of living with his actions is not worth what he has gone through. He's tormented by his life and how he'd rather be like Duncan in the eternal sleep and dead. From that, it will gain more peace from doing so. Lady Macbeth, in hearing this, then asked him to come on, be gentle, my lord, sleek o'er your rugged looks, to be bright and jovial among his guests tonight. Notice how Lady Macbeth here uses imperative verbs, also known as commands, and in doing so, she's trying to direct Macbeth as she did before. In the previous acts of Act 1 and Act 2, for instance, where she was very much in command, she's trying to rally him again, trying to be trying to make him feel more positively in this circumstance. But it's not having the same effect it once did. Macbeth says, "So shall I love, and so I pray be you." He almost realises what she's going through here. Present him, Banquo, eminence, both with eye and tongue. Macbeth needs Lady Macbeth to complete her own role, but notice how he's talking about Banquo when he knows Banquo will be dead. Banquo isn't actually going to attend this banquet should the murderers do what they were meant to do. Now this is important because he then comments how they should make our faces visards, shield on a helmet like a visor to our hearts, disguising what they are. He's returning the advice to Lady Macbeth of hiding the true emotions, almost suggesting there that Lady Macbeth has given away too much, perhaps, that he realises Lady Macbeth in herself is worried and anxious and nervous in this point too. Now, Lady Macbeth comments how he needs to leave this, but he continues by saying, "Full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife." Notice how Macbeth here is tormented by what he has enacted. This use of scorpions, poison, he's been stung by agony. He realises, he's set off this chain of events now where Banquo and, if he had his own way, Fleance would die. A child would die by his command, and he's been tortured by this. And you have to remember Lady Macbeth does not know that this is taking place. Macbeth says thou knowest that Banquo and his Fleance lives. Lady Macbeth then tries to placate him and says, but in them nature's copy's not to turn. The Banquo line will one day end. They won't always go on and on and on. He has to remember this. Yet Macbeth continues and says a kind of ominous tone here. There's comfort, yet they are assailable. They can be hurt, they can be harmed. There shall be done a deed of dreadful note. He's hinting at what's going to happen. There's a foreshadowing here without revealing what he's done. And this is where the crux of the scene takes place. When Lady Macbeth asks what's to be done, Macbeth says, "Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud the deed." Notice here, he will not tell Lady Macbeth what he's put in motion. He's planned this by himself without her, and in doing so, they have caused a separation between the two of them, whereas previously both of them were very powerful together in plotting the plan of murdering Duncan. With murdering Banquo, he doesn't involve Lady Macbeth. He's shutting her out, and this creates this chasm between them, this separation that gets more and more pronounced as we head towards the end of the play. It's a crucial moment, I would argue, because this is the start of the breaking point between the two of them. They only have, I believe, is one more scene together in the entire play after this, which reinforces this level of distance and separation that will become between the two of them. Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud thee, saying, don't think about it, don't worry about it. There's no reason for you to know right now. You will one day congratulate me for what I've done, but you don't need to know what it is I've set in motion. Macbeth then continues by using imagery like light thickens and the crow makes wing to the rooky wood. Good things of day begin to droop and drowse, while night's black agents to their praise do rouse. Macbeth starts talking comfort through kind of imagery, darker imagery and allusions to evil towards the end, and he's gathering strength from them in the same way Lady Macbeth was gathering strength in the Unsex Me Here of Act 1, Scene 5. And then Macbeth ends this scene of Act 3, Scene 2 with, so prithee go with me. Notice how Macbeth ends the scene making orders, and how he is the one in control at the end of this scene. Thank you very much for everybody for getting involved and watching this video. I really appreciate it. Take care, make sure to like, share and subscribe. Follow GuigLit, search GuigLit on all the different social media platforms for more books, beards and beyond. Really appreciate all the time you put into this, it makes my day. So without further ado, take care, all the very best, and bye-bye.